The world is changing fast, and the economic battleground is shifting in ways we've never seen before. The European Union has just declared an all-out economic war against the United States, an unprecedented boycott directly targeting Trump's America and its closest allies. This isn't just about politics, it's about power. US industries are crumbling, and long-standing global alliances are being torn apart. As the EU unites against America, could this be the final chapter in US economic dominance? Could this mark the end of the U.S. Canada partnership as we know it? Buckle up, because the fallout is about to be massive. The EU's shocking boycott. Imagine waking up and realizing that the world's biggest economies have just shut America out. That's exactly what's happening. The United States and the European Union have stood as two of the world's most powerful economic forces, trading partners, competitors, and uneasy allies. But after years of economic turbulence fueled by Trump's tariffs, aggressive trade policies, and unpredictable diplomacy, the EU has had enough. What started as minor disputes over steel and aluminum has now erupted into a full-scale economic confrontation. The European Union has taken a bold and unprecedented step, a near-complete economic break from the United States. At the center of this retaliation is a drastic increase in trade restrictions. The EU has implemented a 50% tariff hike on American goods, dealing a devastating blow to industries ranging from automobile manufacturing to consumer technology. Major American exports to Europe, cars, electronics, pharmaceuticals are now significantly more expensive, making them far less competitive in the European market. This single move alone threatens to cripple entire sectors of the US economy, forcing companies to either absorb the financial hit or pull out of European markets altogether. Beyond manufacturing, the EU's boycott has taken direct aim at one of the most vulnerable sectors of the US economy: agriculture. American farmers, already struggling with ongoing trade disputes with China, now face yet another crisis as the EU completely bans imports of US agricultural products. Billions of dollars in exports, soybeans, corn, beef, dairy, have suddenly vanished. For many farmers who rely on global trade to stay afloat, this isn't just another setback, it's an existential threat. Entire farming communities are now facing economic devastation with no clear path forward. The economic war doesn't stop at goods and agriculture. The EU has also announced a long-term plan to phase out US oil imports, choosing instead to diversify its energy partnerships. Turning to Russia, the Middle East, and increased domestic production, European leaders have made it clear they no longer want to be dependent on American energy. This shift represents a monumental loss for the US energy sector, which has relied on European demand for years. The repercussions will be massive, affecting not just oil companies, but also the thousands of workers whose jobs depend on energy exports. The roots of this crisis is traced to the Trump administration's aggressive economic policies, his imposition of tariffs on European steel and aluminum, his threats to penalize European car manufacturers, and even his willingness to sanction European businesses that engage with rivals like China and Iran, all contributed to a growing resentment. European leaders watched as the US prioritized protectionism over partnership, and now they are responding in kind. This isn't just a reaction to one administration's policies, it's a long-term shift in global economic alliances. European leaders are not holding back in their statements. French President Emmanuel Macron has declared that Europe will no longer be dependent on the United States, emphasizing that the EU must take control of its own economic future. His words reflect a broader sentiment across the continent, one of growing confidence in Europe's ability to stand on its own. Germany, the EU's largest economy, has already taken action, cutting US imports by 20% and signaling its commitment to reducing reliance on American goods. Meanwhile, Spain and Italy have taken even bolder steps, signing exclusive trade agreements with China that bypass American companies entirely. These deals, once unimaginable, are now reshaping the global economic landscape in real time. As Europe pulls away, the consequences for the United States are becoming impossible to ignore. American businesses, long accustomed to access to European markets, are now scrambling to find alternative buyers. The economic ripple effect is just beginning, and industries that once thrived on transatlantic trade are now on the brink of collapse. The question remains, can the United States survive without its biggest trading partner, or is this just the beginning of a much larger collapse? Canada takes the hit, the collapse of a partnership. But there's one country that's suffering the most from all this: Canada. Canada has relied on a delicate balance, trading extensively with both the United States and the European Union. Its economy flourished as a middle player in global commerce, benefiting from its unique position as both a North American powerhouse and a trusted EU trade partner. But with the EU's economic war against the US now in full swing, Canada finds itself caught in the crossfire. The long-standing economic stability it once enjoyed is unraveling at a frightening pace. The biggest blow comes from Canada's overwhelming dependence on American trade. Nearly 75% of its exports go directly to the United States, a reliance that has made Canada one of the most economically intertwined nations in the world. But with the US economy now weakening under the weight of EU tariffs and global isolation, American demand for Canadian goods is plummeting. Industries that once thrived on the steady flow of exports, from lumber and automotive parts to oil and manufactured goods, are now seeing orders dry up. The Canadian economy, so closely tied to its southern neighbor, is feeling the shockwaves of America's economic turmoil like never before. As if losing access to a struggling US market wasn't enough, Canada is also watching its European trade partnerships disintegrate. Once a key player in deals like the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the EU, Canada now faces a devastating shift. European leaders focused on forging new ties with Asia and strengthening internal trade are deprioritizing Canadian deals. The EU's pivot toward China, India, and other emerging markets has left Canada sidelined, its once promising trade relationships fading into uncertainty. Without strong economic ties to either the US or the EU, Canada is slipping into dangerous economic isolation. The effects are being felt across Canada's most critical industries. The manufacturing sector, which relies heavily on exports to both the US and Europe, is facing record losses. Auto parts production, once booming due to high demand from American and European automakers, is now collapsing. The steel industry, a vital component of Canada's economy, is experiencing major slowdowns as both the US and EU cut back on imports. Meanwhile, the energy sector, long a pillar of Canada's economic success, is being squeezed from both sides. The US, Canada's largest buyer of oil and gas, is dealing with its own economic crisis and reducing imports. At the same time, the EU, now shifting away from North American energy, is securing alternative sources, leaving Canada with fewer markets to sell its resources. Even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been forced to acknowledge the gravity of the situation, calling it one of the toughest economic periods our nation has faced. Trudeau has attempted to reassure Canadians that the government is exploring new trade opportunities. But behind closed doors, policymakers know the reality. Without strong economic ties to either of its major partners, Canada is staring down an economic crisis it never saw coming. Beyond traditional industries, Canada's once thriving tech sector is also under siege, with European investors pulling back and American firms prioritizing domestic stability over foreign expansion. Canadian startups and major tech companies alike are struggling to attract capital. Foreign investment, once a major driver of innovation and economic growth, is drying up fast. Without the financial backing of the US and EU markets, the future of Canada's tech industry is becoming increasingly uncertain. The consequences of this unraveling partnership are only beginning to unfold. As Canada watches its trade deals collapse, its industries shrink, and its economic security slip away, the question remains: how will it survive this global realignment? With the US and the EU both moving in opposite directions, Canada has been left stranded, and unless it can find a new path forward, it may be facing one of the darkest economic periods in its history. The US economy crashes, Trump's last stand. The American economy is spiraling into chaos. Once the undisputed leader of global trade and finance, the United States now finds itself in the middle of an economic freefall. The EU's aggressive boycott, combined with Canada's financial collapse, has sent shockwaves through every major US industry. The fallout is unlike anything seen in modern history. Three major economic crises are unfolding simultaneously, pushing the country toward an uncertain future. The first blow has come in the form of a stock market panic. In just a few months, the Dow Jones has plunged by over 4,000 points, wiping out billions in wealth and sending investors into a frenzy. Major corporations that once led the global economy, Tesla, Apple, and Ford, are suffering unprecedented losses. The once booming tech industry, which relied heavily on European and Canadian markets for sales and investment, is now facing mass layoffs. With international markets drying up, Silicon Valley has been forced to to cut back, sending thousands of workers into unemployment. The golden age of American innovation is coming to a grinding halt. As the market tumbles, rising consumer prices are making life even harder for everyday Americans. With EU tariffs now in place, the cost of basic goods, electronics, clothing, and even food has skyrocketed. European imports, once a staple of American luxury, are becoming unaffordable. BMWs, designer brands, and high-end consumer products now come with a 30% price increase, pushing them out of reach for many. But it's not just luxury goods. Everything from smartphones to pharmaceuticals is becoming more expensive. Inflation, which was already a concern, is now spiraling out of control, crushing the purchasing power of the American middle class. But perhaps the most devastating collapse is in the auto industry, a cornerstone of the American economy. For decades, U.S. car manufacturers like Ford, GM, and Tesla have relied on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and the EU. Over 80% of the materials used to build American cars come from these regions. But with Canada's economy in freefall and the EU cutting off trade, production has stalled. Factories are shutting down, thousands of workers are losing their jobs, and American automakers are being forced to raise prices to stay afloat. The ripple effect is brutal. Dealerships are struggling, car sales are plummeting, and one of the biggest industries in the US is collapsing before the nation's eyes. For the first time in modern history, the US is losing its economic stranglehold on the world. Its industries are suffering, its financial markets are crumbling, and its influence is slipping. The nation that once dictated the terms of global trade is now finding itself isolated, as powerful economies like the EU and China reshape the global order. The global shift: who wins, who loses? As the US and EU engage in an economic standoff, a new power dynamic is emerging, one that could permanently alter the balance of global influence. While the West is busy battling itself, China and Russia are stepping in to fill the void, strategically expanding their economic reach in ways that could reshape the world order. China, already a dominant force in global trade, is capitalizing on the EU's break from the US new trade agreements with Germany. France and Italy have solidified China's presence in European markets, giving it unprecedented access to some of the world's wealthiest economies. As American companies struggle with tariffs and boycotts, Chinese corporations are stepping in, providing European consumers with cheaper alternatives and locking in long-term business relationships. With every deal signed, China's grip on the global economy tightens. Meanwhile, Russia is expanding its energy dominance. With the EU phasing out US oil imports, European nations are becoming more dependent on Russian energy than ever before. Moscow has seized the moment, offering competitive deals on oil and natural gas, making it nearly impossible for the EU to cut ties. Countries that once hesitated to rely on Russian energy, like Germany and France, are now left with few alternatives. The result? Russia's economic and political leverage over Europe has never been stronger. But the shift doesn't stop there. India, Brazil, and even the Middle East are distancing themselves from American trade, forging new partnerships that don't rely on the US dollar. As these emerging economies diversify their alliances, the once unshakable dominance of American financial institutions is eroding. The global economy is becoming more multipolar, and the US is finding itself increasingly isolated. The world is shifting, and the United States may never regain its former dominance. What was once a nation at the center of global trade is now watching from the sidelines as new power players rise. The question is no longer if the US can recover, but whether it can adapt to this new reality before it's too late. The final warning: is this the end of the US and Canada? So what happens next? Is this truly the breaking point for the U.S.-Canada partnership? The signs are grim, and the economic fallout is accelerating faster than anyone predicted. What was once an unshakable alliance between two of the world's closest trading partners is now on the verge of collapse, and experts are sounding the alarm. For Canada, the choices are bleak. With both the US and EU markets slipping away, it may have no choice but to align itself with China's economic sphere just to survive. Already, whispers of new trade negotiations with Beijing are growing louder, and as Canadian industries struggle to find buyers, China could become the only viable option left. If this happens, it would mark a historic shift, a US ally turning toward America's biggest rival out of economic desperation. Meanwhile, the US is facing an unprecedented reckoning. Years Years of aggressive trade policies, tariffs, and economic brinkmanship have left Washington with few friends and even fewer options. If the US doesn't rethink its entire trade strategy, it risks total economic collapse. The EU's boycott may be the first domino to fall, but if more countries follow, if Asia, Latin America, and even parts of the Middle East continue to distance themselves from American trade, then the US could see its global influence slip away for good. And yet, Trump remains defiant. His supporters insist this is just temporary turbulence, another short-term battle that America will inevitably win. But financial analysts paint a much darker picture, warning that the US may be entering its worst economic crisis in modern history. The global economy is shifting, and the old rules no longer apply. The question now isn't just whether the US and Canada can repair their fractured partnership, it's whether America can survive in a world where it's no longer the dominant force. The road ahead is uncertain, and as global alliances continue to shift, one thing is clear: nothing will ever be the same again.